walk you home. Let me walk you home to Jesus. He's running out to meet us, and his smile lights up the way. Let me walk you home, and we can make this road a sanctuary, a haven for the weary. And before we know, the time is flown. We blink our eyes, the years pass by. So let me walk you home.
Hey there, I'll share this news from 8 years back. It's still not true. The tale might be long, the facts might fall short, but it totally supports my current point of view. Thumbs up, thumbs down, click the smile, click the frown. Friends from every type and speed. I'm so glad that you're on my news feed.
Now I lay me down to sleep. All night, all day, angels watching over me, my love. All night, all day, angels.
And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters 2020. I'm your host, Jason Tramm, and we're delighted you could join us for our new and unique podcast community, where we explore the challenges and issues facing classical music in 2020 in such a challenging and year that we've never seen before. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and hit that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. You can check out our website at www.jasontram.com for all of our upcoming guests and our library of past guests. This is our 55th episode, and we're delighted that you can join us. Thank you so much for joining us in this challenging time. I would like to thank our guest tonight. We have a wonderful guest, a composer who is internationally acclaimed and one of the most published composers of choral music in America, as well as piano music, Miss Heather Sorenson. So thank you so much for joining us, Heather, and welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's nice to meet you virtually, and that's how we're all doing it.
It's amazing what we get used to these days with the virtual and the Zoom and all the telecommunications, but it's great that we can be here, me in New York and you in Dallas, Texas, and everything is well in Texas, I assume?
It is. It's 95 degrees today, and so fall has not fallen here yet, and I think that I don't ever really put away my summer clothes, so I am living vicariously through you and all of those who are viewing from the north. I'm just a little bit envious. I know that you're not.
Those leaves are starting to change, and the colors, by Halloween, we'll have all our peak foliage out, and we're getting ready for our fall season.
Fantastic.
So tell us about your work and your development as an artist.
Yeah, well, I tell people that I came out of the womb knowing how to play the piano. It's just, it was one of those natural gifts. Of course, I fine-tuned it, and I studied and all of that. So, but I felt so crushed as a child because my parents made me wait until I was 6 years old to take piano lessons. And so, I just studied music all the way through my growing up years, all the way into college. I have a degree in music, piano proficiency. And I first got my start in the music industry by writing piano solo books for Lilliness years ago, almost 20 years ago. Isn't that crazy? back when the Lillinus was a really big organization at that time. And since then, the Lillinus piano division has been sold to Lorenz. But I did solely piano books for about 5 or 6 years, and then, for other companies as well. And then one day, one of my publishers of piano books said, "Hey, would you be willing to try your hand at writing a choral arrangement for us?" And I think I said something along the lines of, "I'll try." Okay, sure, why not? I'm up for anything. And the first piece sold really well. And so they gave me a contract pretty much right then. And so my career took a major shift at that point. And so choral music has become very much the bread and butter of my career for the past, 15 years or so. And if you would have told me that 15 or 20 years ago, that I would be known as Heather Sorenson, the composer, the choral composer, you probably would have heard a little bit of crickets, and then a little awkward laugh or something, because it was not on my radar at all. Not anything that I set out to do or plan to do. It's just it's obviously the plan, the path that I'm supposed to take, and I've been enjoying it very much.
You certainly know when you find that path and everything lines up. It's just the Lord makes that path for you, and when you start, all of a sudden everything just falls into place. What year was your first choral piece published? Oh,
my first choral piece, I'm gonna say 2007, 2008, maybe. The way the industry works is that in the choral industry, the print music industry, if I write something in, let's say, September or October, it doesn't usually get published for about a year after that, the way that the system works. And so I never remember when things actually get released, but I think it was probably 2008-ish, maybe, was the first one.
And since then, how many pieces are in your catalog, if you had to take a guess currently?
Oh, I don't keep track. Isn't that crazy? I'm going to say between piano collections and cantatas and individual octavos, I'm going to say a couple hundred, probably 200-300 is what I'm guessing.
And how do you find the time to balance the writing for piano and the writing for voice and other instruments?
Well, deadlines. I have a contract with the Hal Leonard Corporation, and so it's a pretty hefty contract, and so it keeps me busy, and I have a lot of things that have to be turned in by certain times, and so I work really well on a deadline, and so that keeps me busy. Piano works are not part of my contract. They're just things that publishers will come to me randomly and say, "Hey, we haven't done a collection from you in 2 years. Do you want to do a collection for us, or would you like to partner with a couple other arrangers and do a collection?" As far as dividing my time, I'm kind of a morning writer. That's when I'm most creative. And that's when I'm most logical, so I make all my big decisions in life in the morning. But I get up in the mornings, and if I'm home, in non-COVID times, I travel a lot. But during COVID times, I'm home now, and so I protect my mornings greatly, and I use that to write most of my choral music. And if I'm working on an orchestra score, sometimes I'll do that in the evenings. Afternoons, I'm not creative at all. That's laundry and grocery shopping and that kind of a thing. So I guess I like to work on one piece at a time. Some people have a couple things going, and sometimes I do too, but I try to just get one thing out of the way, because it's kind of all consuming. You put everything into that one piece, and then you close the books and you move on to the next one. So I don't know if that answered your question.
I think it does. It gives us a really good view into how your organization and how you start putting these pieces together. And what was some of the challenges when you first ventured into the choral domain?
Oh, what were some of the challenges? I don't know that I've ever gotten that question before. I was an instrumentalist, and so that was my training, and I had a pretty good handle on a lot of things that would translate over into choral writing. I knew the part writing rules. I had to take all those classes in college. But I think that the biggest challenge for me was translating what was on paper to real life and seeing that what works perfectly on paper by all the rules. I could keep every single rule, not break any of the rules. I could have something that was just, phenolic played it back beautifully, and you put it in front of a live group. And even though I kept all of the rules, sometimes it didn't sing with the ease that I wanted. And so learning that, the altos are always going to go flat, even if they're only moving by a half step here. It's because of the reach and in the range and where it falls in the voice. And then if you do this with the tenors, they're automatically going to blast that note just because that's in that part of their register. And so all of these little intricacies that you wouldn't know unless you work with live choirs a lot. And so I think that was my biggest hurdle, but I loved it because every time I would put my music in front of a group of people, that was my greatest teacher, really. They teach you things, maybe this little part here didn't shimmer the exact way that you thought it would shimmer. It sounded fine, but it didn't shimmer. Or maybe this part didn't quite cut through in the same way that you wanted it to cut through all of the other material going on. And so those are things that you learn just by doing. And so I think that, I think being a composer is a skill that you just get better and better and better at. Some talents, you peak and then you find something else very meaningful to do with your life. In composition, I think that we never ever stop learning, and I love that.
Yeah, there's always a new challenge to embrace. There's always a new ensemble to write for. That's, as a conductor, I'm always intrigued by new composers, new composition, periods of famous composers' lives, and it's always so much fun to delve into that. And there's limitless growth, I say, in that field.
Yeah, I have seen growth in my own writing, and as you look, I'm sure every composer can say this, looking back at some of their first pieces, they just, if they're like me, they're just cringing, like, oh, why did I put that there? But I love the growing process and the learning process, and it's great.
I tell my undergraduates that music's like amber. It's like a fly in amber, and it crystallizes everything that's around it. And I imagine as a composer, you see things that were going on in your life, and it kind of captures that moment in your memory. Do you feel that way about your music?
Absolutely. And there are pieces that I wrote, 10, 12 years ago that I pull them out and dust them off, and immediately someone's name comes to mind. And I remember what was going on in their life, because that person was going through a cancer struggle, and they were so heavy on my heart while I was writing this. And so, yes, these things are all interwoven into the music and into my memories of the music. There's a piano project that I did. I'm turning around to look at my collection thing to see which one it is. Until a Child. Until a Child was the name of the book. And every single arrangement in this piano book, there's a story behind. One of them, I went and saw The Passion of the Christ at a movie theater, and I had not grown up going to the theater. We have a very unusual background, but just being in the theater and seeing the life of Christ and hearing that soundtrack that was so moving, I sat down to arrange a piano song for this Christmas book that I was scheduled to be writing. And it came out with this very haunting Hebrew sound. And I wasn't trying to mimic what I had just heard, but it had so infiltrated my emotional process. And every song in that book, every arrangement has a story like that. Like I went to a Josh Groban concert, and it opened with Riverdance. And so I sat down the next day to write my next arrangement, and it was complete Riverdance. And again, I wasn't trying to do that. It's just, I'm such a musical sponge that you take it all in, and it comes out in your writing, and not just sounds, but events, things that take place in your life, in your friends' lives, things like that.
I have 4 children, and they go from ages 21 to 15, and pretty much any of the major performances of my career, I can say, oh yeah, my son was X, and he was at the concert, my Carnegie Hall debut, or if I was doing something in Europe, and I'm like, my son was this age, or my daughter was this age. It's kind of interesting how those barometers are always with us as artists.
That's right. For some reason, those memories they are sewn into our music as we write them, and forever we will always think of those people or those events as we perform or play or dust them off or something like that.
We have our first question from the audience. This is Dorothy from Abilene, Texas, and she asks, were your parents musical, and if so, did they help you discover the piano?
My dad's side of the family is somewhat musical. We've got a lot of pianists in the family. My mom's side of the family, not so much. And but we always had pianos in our homes, the old pianos that were passed down from generation to generation. So just real clunkers. I learned out of real clunkers. Somehow I learned to make music, but they always did encourage me. They always provided lessons. Anything musically that I wanted to do, I think that they were open to trying to make that happen. I will say that, I alluded to a kind of an unusual upbringing in the past. And so I won't get into a lot of that, but we were taught that with the exception of hymns and some classical music, that most music was considered worldly and displeasing to God. And so my exposure to music was about this big. Even though music was a big part of my life, I had exposure to about this much of music growing up. And so I think that's why I'm such a sponge these days. When I go somewhere and hear music, I think that my brain is it's taking all of those different things and it filters them all down. But yeah, that was kind of that's my family background in music.
So when you went to college and you were exposed to the larger musical world, what was that like for a young aspiring pianist, soon to be composer? What was that like when you got to that, when you started to see the wider picture that music represents?
Oh, well, I loved collaborating with different artists. I was homeschooled growing up, and so there was very little collaborating. I was I played cello horribly in an orchestra growing up, but just being able to have other people around me and to not just be the only musician, to have a full complement, a full ensemble of this or that, it was a wonderful thing. Yeah.
Now, faith is very important from your bio, and certainly that faith has been very important to your music. How do you see the intersection of faith in your career and in your composing?
Every composer, they write from a certain place, or they are inspired by different things, and I think that for the most part, they're all good reasons. We all write from different places, and it's my faith journey that usually propels my writing. Not every single song I write, not every single work, but most of it. Most of my catalog is driven by my own faith journey. And I say sometimes that if you want to know how God's chisel is shaping me, to just look at the songs that I'm writing. Not every song is God's chisel, but many of them are. And, usually if I'm writing about a song or writing about a truth or a topic, often it's because I have not yet mastered it. And God's like, okay, we're gonna write a song about this, and we're gonna live with this truth this week while you work on this song. So it's a very important part of my process. I would say that this sounds so sacrilegious, and forgive me, Lord, and I'll explain in a minute, but I would say that my faith journey is more part of my choral writing and my singer-songwriter writing than it is with my instrumental writing. And not because I leave God out of that, it's just that choral and singer-songwriter has lyrics to it. And so lyrics bring a whole new level of testimony, I don't know if that's the right word, where I'm actually verbalizing my faith, and I'm verbalizing my journey a little bit. And it's the oddest thing, every Sunday morning to get up and know that choirs all across the world are opening up my faith journey, and they're opening up my wounds and my scars in their choir folders. They just open up my piece and they sing my story. And that's just the oddest feeling as a composer. It's neat, but it's odd, For instrumental stuff, like the latest instrumental piece that I worked on was, it's called Scenes from Life. It's a suite for piano, violin, and cello. And it's got, the first movement is a seascape. The second movement is a cityscape. Then you've got the snowscape and the nightscape. So they're not necessarily sacred, but I think that, if I was created to compose music, that just by composing music, just by doing what I was created to do, I think that in itself is an act of worship. And so God is present there too.
I feel the same as what I'm doing. I do part of my career is I'm the music director at Ocean Grove, which is a 6,500 seat venue in New Jersey. It's a church, and that's where I met people like Joe Martin, and indirectly that's where I met you. We do a large music ministry there, but I'm also an opera conductor, and I've done a lot of symphonic work. And I feel that whenever I'm on the road and I'm doing an opera, I always pray backstage and say, please help me to move the hearts of those I'm working with, just to guide me, because I don't see that much of a difference. Of course, in the sacred circumstance, like in church, we have that religious text to draw on. But I think that any music we make when we're people of faith it just becomes that.
Absolutely. And God can use anything to do his work. It doesn't have to be a sacred text. It can be, he can use an inanimate object to do his work. He can do whatever he wants. So I absolutely agree with that.
Amazing. So tell me about, do you pick your own lyrics? Do you write your own lyrics, or do you work with librettists or lyricists?
Both. Mm-hmm. When I first started out, I would not write lyrics. In fact, I would not call myself a composer for many years. This was after I had many pieces in print. This was after I had written my own lyrics and they had become #1 songs, and I still would refuse to call myself a composer because I felt like I worked too hard and I prayed too hard over my lyrics. I felt like they did not come as naturally as the actual music writing itself, and I felt like I was not worthy to call myself a composer. When I would look at some of my colleagues and lyrics came so easily to them, and I thought, well, they don't come easily to me, so I should not call myself a composer. I'm just going to call myself an arranger, even though I was writing lyrics, which is silly because composers are, it doesn't matter whether you're a lyricist or not, but I would always feel bad because people would invite me to be a guest composer, and they would introduce me as, this is Heather Sorenson, the composer. And I felt so guilty because I thought, what if they find out that I'm not really a composer? They're paying me all this money to be here and I'm not a composer. And one day God just kind of spiritually spanked me and he said, Heather, you are a composer because I've called you to be a composer. And so you just kind of need to get over yourself, and all the work and all of the prayer that goes into writing your lyrics, that's all part of my process for you. And that's part of my plan for you. So ever since then, I have been Heather Sorenson, the composer. But yes, so I started not writing lyrics. I had no confidence in myself in that. And then, I started writing lyrics, and I've become quite a bit more comfortable with that. People often ask me what comes first, the music or the lyrics.
That was my next question. Wonderful.
That is one of my most asked questions. And I'm going to say that it's a pendulum and it has shifted a little bit. I first started off, if I wrote the lyrics to something, I always started off with the music because I was so comfortable writing the music. And I thought in melodies and harmonies first. And then I would have kind of an idea of what the words might be or what the subject matter might be. And then I would kind of add those in later. And then it started to come kind of at the same time, as I became a little bit more experienced in writing lyrics. And the lyrics and the melody would kind of be interwoven in the creative process. And lately, I've actually been writing a lot of lyrics before I've even put any music onto the paper. So, yeah, I think every song is different. Inspiration comes in all different ways, and so yeah.
It's interesting. And when did you? How do you find a text that resonates with you? Do people submit you texts? How do you find those writing partners?
I get a lot of people who send me texts, and most of them I graciously, hopefully very graciously turn them down. Not because some of them are not wonderful texts. There's a lot of reasons why I would accept or not accept a text.
Seems like a very personal decision. It has to move your heart in order to be able to write a quality piece, I'd imagine.
Right. I want that text. This text obviously has great meaning to the lyricist, and I want the text to shine. And if I don't feel like I can put anything on paper and make it work, but I don't want it to just work. I want it to make that text shine. So if I'm not feeling that great connection with that, they deserve to send it to someone where it will shine. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason why I don't accept a lot of texts is a little bit more technical. As a self-supporting, self-employed, full-time composer, anytime that I accept a lyric and I send that off to my publisher, I immediately split the royalties in half. And so I have to make some business decisions too. There are some financial decisions that I have to make, and that sounds so clunky in an art world. We don't want to think in those terms, but we do. This is also a business, And so I know that I have to have enough pieces in the next release that's coming out from whatever publisher, usually Hal Leonard, that I get all of the royalties on in order to pay my light bill, my mortgage payment, that kind of a thing. So there are some real just clunky things that I have to factor in. And so I don't accept many lyrics. I don't collaborate with a whole lot of people unless my publisher reaches out and says, hey, there's a new Carrie Job song that we think that it would really work well with your style. Sometimes I pull from poets. I did a Chesterton poem a couple years ago, that I really enjoyed, The Inn at the End of the World. So sometimes, I'll pull from the poets, but most of the time it's either my own lyrics or public domain.
Interesting. Do you have poets? Who are some of your favorite poets that have influenced you?
I did not have a real strong poetry background in growing up. That was not a big part of my education. But Chesterton, for some reason, I really, really enjoyed his works. And I always say that, a lot of times good art is provocative. It makes you think. It doesn't just spell things out for you. It makes you connect the dots and find new dots to connect. And I feel like his works do that a little bit. And so I'm drawn to his a little bit. And then there's some just really rich hymn texts that are ancient that a lot of people don't know about. And so every now and then I'll find one of those and set those to music. So, yeah.
We have another question from one of our guests. This is from Jesse, and he says, what's the story behind God of Heaven? His choir in his church loves that piece.
Oh, okay. God of Heaven was my very first attempt at writing an original choral piece. So when I was talking about, praying over the lyrics and the words, this was one of those pieces because I had never done that in a choral piece. This is a piece where I wrote all of the music first, and then I went back in and I added text, which is exactly opposite of what most people do. But it came out of a time in my life when I was going through a little bit of a rough patch, nothing major. We all go through ups and downs in our journey, and that's just life. And so I can't remember where I was when I was having my morning devotions. It seems to me that it was like 2 Chronicles or something really dry. I don't remember. But I decided that, I'm going to flip over to the book of Job today in my reading, because if anybody had it rough, well, just remember Job. He was the ultimate at surviving horrible things. And so I remembered that Job had questioned God. And I wanted to read God's response to Job because I wanted to hear some response from from God too. And so I flipped over to the back of the book. I think it was Job 38, where God responds to Job's questions. And I love that scripture includes that Job had questions for God, because I have learned that my questions do not threaten God. They don't intimidate God. They don't diminish who he is, that he's very open to my questions. So I love that. But anyways, I wanted to read what he wrote in response to Job's questions. And what really surprised me was that in God's response, he did not offer any solutions, nor did he offer any comfort. And those are the two things that immediately I want when I'm going through a hard time. Lord, can you fix this right now? And in the very short meantime, will you give me a whole lot of extra grace? But God did not offer any of those. Instead, he told Job who he is. And when I read God describing himself in poetry, no less, and what he had done, it just blew me away. And I think that it helped put things in perspective for me. When we remember who God is, that really puts things in perspective. And so I went up that morning to my little home office, and I was actually scheduled to write a contemporary praise song for my publisher that day. That was on the to-do list, right? Contemporary song. But after reading this passage in Job, a very, very different song came out instead. And of course, my publishers work with artists all the time, and they understand that sometimes you go with the inspiration that day, and they were very gracious to extend the time for me to do the other one, and that ended up being one of my best sellers, actually. So.
That's interesting how God moves in lives and moves in pieces. What do you feel when you hear like when you see a piece of yours performed by a choir, or you go to a festival and you witness these pieces coming to life with singers and actual people making these dots and dashes come to life? What does that feel like for you?
Extremely humbling, because for so many reasons. I sit in my little home office, and you write things on paper that are very meaningful to me because it's my journey and truths that I'm struggling through and working with. And you hope that maybe it will touch somebody else and maybe minister to where they are, but you don't know. You never know. And sometimes, we're given inspiration for a song. I think sometimes just for our own personal connection with God, where we're working things out. But it's extremely humbling. And I don't know that you ever get over that. I think some of the times when I am moved the most is when people from all over the world send me YouTubes of their choir or their festival singing, and they're singing my music in a different language that I don't understand. And yet I know the truths that are represented, and it reminds me of how big God is and how much bigger his plans are for ministry than my plans were. I wanted to get one little piano arrangement published, and that was the dream of my life. Just, Lord, if I can just get one piano arrangement by a mainstream publisher, then that's my goal in life, and his plans are so much bigger. So
we had a wonderful concert pianist, Jeff. It was a few weeks ago, and he talked about his. This is Jeff. I lost Jeff's last name. Jeffrey was on, and he was talking about the yellow brick road, and his whole thing was this metaphor of the yellow brick road, and each person has to find their yellow brick road. And for you, once you got on that road, it's just been, it just makes sense, and everything opens up like you're doing.
It did. Doors opened that I didn't even know were there. I had people, I knew nothing of the choral world before I got thrown into it. So just the whole choral process was a big learning thing for me. I was all of a sudden in a new world, and I love it, but I had to jump in and learn to swim really fast. But just heavyweights in the industry would reach out to me and say, I want to mentor you. Tom Fetke, I knew Majesty and Glory of Your Name, and I was just in awe of that piece. And so I thought he was just the most wonderful thing in the world. That's the only thing I really knew that he had written. But, and the first time he met me, he said, Heather, I want to mentor you. And so for the next year or two, every 6 weeks or so, he would call me and just say, what are you writing? And so many other people have just taken me under their wing for years. And I can call them up anytime and say, I'm in a situation here where there are no right answers, with this music event, and what would you do? And so they've been so gracious. But yeah, it's when God has something planned for you, there's nothing that can stop that.
Very profound. Now, one thing about your career, which is so interesting, is you seamlessly transition between contemporary and traditional. Talk about that, because that's very unusual, and it is such a topic of somewhat division in churches today.
It is. Yeah, and thankfully some of those music wars have died down a little bit. So it's not the all-out battle scene that it was before, thankfully. I think that it was horrible that Satan took a gift from God like music and used it to divide the church. And so now I think that we're trying to use music to bring things back together. But I was classically trained, and so I have one foot in that world. But I also, from the time I was born, I knew how to do improvisational styles. That was so natural for me. And so that it lends itself to the more contemporary side of the world. And so I've been in ministries that are both. And so I feel like I have my feet firmly planted in two sides of the music world. And so when I write my music, I think that naturally I'm drawing from both sides without even realizing. I had somebody once, I was giving a composition lesson, and he said, tell me how you do it. Tell me how you get that perfect blend that both sides latch onto. And I said, well, I don't have a formula. It's just very organic for me, because I understand the nuances of both sides, and they just naturally come out. So I don't think that it's something that I try to do. It's just something that naturally happens in some of my music. And it's kind of given me a unique fingerprint on the industry, I think, where even very traditional choirs will sing some of my music that would typically fall a little bit more blended or more contemporary. And then I've got contemporary choirs sometimes that will sing some of my more traditional music. It's just this really weird mixture, I guess. I don't know if I answered that question well. Not every composer agrees with that. Some of them are purists. Some very good musicians are purists, and they don't appreciate not just the writing of a different style, but that I would travel back and forth kind of between the two and blur those lines a little bit. But I think that music is language, and music is such a big vocabulary that we can use, and language changes, and the nuances of language change, and so music changes. And I love it all. I love classical. I love high church. I love contemporary. I like jazz. I like singer-songwriter. I love folk. So I guess I like to utilize all of those. Sometimes all in the same song.
That's wonderful. Have you? I love this. I love these conversations because we see how interesting and different all people are, and how everyone's individual path is so unique, and how each artist is a world unto themselves.
So it's been fun, and I am so blessed that I work for such a large company, the Hal Leonard Corporation, that has a customer base that's very far-reaching on either side of those spectrums. And so no matter what I write, there's almost always a market somewhere for it. And because they're such a large company, they've been very gracious to let me try all of these different things. And there are people out there that's what they're looking for. So I feel very blessed and fortunate in that, because some publishers are very much a one-string thing, and they do that well, and that's their customer base, and that's what they focus on. And then you've got publishers over here that are focusing on this, and this is their customer base. And of course, Hal Leonard is very broad, and so I feel blessed that I landed there, and they let me scratch my itch on both sides.
That's wonderful. And so let's pivot into the COVID era. How has COVID, of course, COVID's affected everybody in our society and our world, but how has that specifically affected your work? And how have you made adjustments to your schedule and your life as things have changed?
Yes, well, I am a full-time self-employed composer. I don't have a side job, which most composers do. Most composers are a professor or a music minister, and they do this on the side. So they have a built-in salary already with all the benefits. And that is not the case with me. My career up until COVID, pre-COVID, which, by the way, I typed that word the other day, and Microsoft told me that that's not a word. And I'm like,
Time to update that one.
Yeah, it's gonna be in the next dictionary. But anyways, pre-COVID, I made all of my income through basically choral royalties, and then I would go out on the road as a guest composer and a guest artist at different events, universities, churches, schools, that kind of a thing. And so when March hit, every single event got wiped out. Every choir stopped singing, so every choral sale stopped. So both sides of my income, the royalties and the gigs and the speaking, they completely went away, which is, for a single girl supporting herself, full-time composer, that's a little bit scary. But in spite of everything, there have been so many silver linings. Every single need has been met. Even the wants, the extras, have been provided. God has been so good to me there. I get to stay home. Last year in 2019, I think I had 30 different events, so I was never home, and I kind of had the tail wagging the dog. So I am home now, which I'm loving, and but I feel a little bit like the story in the New Testament where you've got the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 pieces of fish, and when they touch the hands of God, they just keep multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. And so I kind of feel like that as far as God's provision for me. He took great care of me before this all went down, and his care of me never changed. And when I look back, I think that somehow maybe I kind of got the feeling of maybe I had been supporting myself, and then when God took it all away, I realized, well, it was God who was supporting me all along, and that just didn't change. And so I feel like I'm very fortunate to have my career still intact at a time when the whole arts community just really tanked. And so how have I been keeping busy? I've been keeping busy. Many Zoom sessions, lots of interviews, some compositions, some virtual choir concerts that I'm working on for different organizations that are upcoming. I've had something that was surprising to me in all of this, And I think this is also God's provision, is that I have had so many commission work. People have requested so many commissions, which is just crazy.
That's
because
wonderful.
Nobody's performing, so you would think that people would stop requesting commissions, but so many have come in, and I think I've had more this year, more since COVID hit than any other year, and I've got a stack of them still. And so God has just used that not only to provide work, but to provide income, to keep that creativity going. So that's been a really neat thing. This past weekend, I did my first event since COVID, and it looked a little bit different because COVID, but it's called Compositions. And I've been working on this for about 1.5 years now, where I teamed up with an artist, an award-winning artist in the Dallas area. She's a fantastic painter. And so this past year, I've studied her paintings, and I've used her individual paintings as inspiration to create new compositions.
Oh, wonderful.
While I was doing that, she was studying my pre-existing compositions and using individual pieces as inspiration to create new individual paintings. So we've got these pairings of a composition with a painting, a composition with a painting. And the culmination of that collaboration came this past weekend at an event called Compositions here in the Dallas area, where we had a gallery, very spaced apart in this large atrium outside of the concert hall. And then rather than doing the full orchestra and the big choir like I normally would like to do, of course, we way scaled it down to small chamber group. And they performed the music, and we talked about the stories behind the paintings, the stories behind the songs. So it was a really, really neat event. So that's been keeping me pretty busy.
Was that presented virtually, or was there an audience in-house, or were they virtual?
It was an in-house audience. We had a lot requests for live stream, and we said no, because it loses something with the paintings with a streaming. So what we did to make it COVID safe is it was a limited guest event, and people they could only attend by pre-registration and by reservation. And so I think that we utilized 30%, maybe just under 30%, very spaced out groups of people. The musicians were way far away, that kind of a thing. So yeah, it was an in-person event, and the first one I've done since March.
That's great to hear that there's live performances bubbling up. We had Jim Neglia from the Jacksonville Symphony. He's the timpanist, and he was saying that they're doing a full season. He just did his first concert. He's a very well-known orchestral contractor throughout the country for big pop acts, and he was saying that him and his orchestra committee, they put together the guidelines to put together a full season that they're actually in the middle of right now. And so there are performances bubbling up, and they're opening up again in small, very safely and carefully controlled environments. So it's great to hear that Dallas is starting to do that as well.
Yes, very, very carefully, very gingerly. And, you have to also keep in mind what part of the country you're in and what the COVID situation is there and what the risk factors are. There are some parts of the country that are almost unaffected. And so they have to make decisions for their community based on that. And so it's just, we're all in unprecedented territory, and we're all trying to make the wisest decisions and yet still keep the arts alive and keep doing our craft.
Well, I love this cross-pollination of art and music and how it comes together. What a wonderful project. Who was the artist again?
Her name is Mo Sanford. She's absolutely amazing. She was a child prodigy, studied at Carnegie Mellon up in New York, I think. And just had a great career as an artist, and we bumped into each other, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. She's a strong believer, and we just clicked, and so I had this idea swirling around in my brain for a couple of years now. We're going to be repeats of this, hopefully. We're talking to some universities right now to see if maybe in 2021 we can partner with universities on this as well.
Yeah, that's a wonderful project to bring to schools, to bring to departments, so people can see this. I hope it has a big life post-COVID.
Thank you.
One other question, let's dig in. We have one here from the audience. What do you think are some of the largest gaps of content in publishers' catalogs today? Specific industry question.
Oh, gaps. I feel like I want to be asking that question to the customer base, because that's a question we're always asking people. What are you looking for? What can we supply for you that you need that you're not seeing? something that when I ask that question, a lot of times I hear people say we need instrumental music. And there are some very valid business reasons why that doesn't take place, because publishing companies, at the end of the day, they're a business. And a lot of times instrumental music just doesn't bring in the revenue for what it costs to produce it. So that's an answer that I get often from people. And, anytime we ask this question, everybody has something different that they're looking for. Some people want music that's a little bit more high churchy, or that's something that they can sink their teeth into more. And then as soon as you put that out, then you have a whole parcel of churches that says, we can't sing that. My little volunteer choir of 8 people, we can't pull that off. Where's that? And so I think, I'm speaking for Hal Leonard here. I'm not a Hal Leonard representative, really. I'm one of their writers. But I think I know their heartbeat. And, of course, Joseph Martin is the creative director over all of the sacred music publishing there. And I know his heart because he's a good friend of mine. And his heart and our hearts and the sacred on the church side of things is that we want to find those holes. What do you need? And if we can make that work financially, we are going to try to do that. So I feel like I need to be asking all of your viewers that question.
Good point. Good point. Thank you for answering that. So what advice would you have for young composers coming up today in this fascinating time period we find ourselves? What advice do you have for these young people who are starting their careers?
First of all, I would say get a good education in music, because there are a bazillion people who are musicians, and there are that many people who want to make a career out of it. And I want to be honest with you that it is not an easy career. There are very few openings.
This may shock people, right? It's like music is not an easy career.
Not an easy career, and I feel extremely blessed to have a full-time job that keeps me very busy with it. But so you need to do things that will set you apart from the pack. So you need to have a strong music education. You need to understand music theory. All of these things will open doors for you, because most musicians, again, I feel extremely blessed to have specialty areas, but most musicians, they support themselves by dabbling here and dabbling there. And I'm going to go and do weddings on the side, and then I'm going to do a little composing on the side, and then I'm going to be a studio musician over here on the side. And none of those are full-time jobs. They're all of these little part-time jobs that are patched together, and that's how they make it work. But you have to be very diverse, and you have to have a lot of skills in your tool belt in order to make that work. And a lot of people who are musicians don't take the time or the money to invest in that. So I would say start there. Connections. You need to have a network. No matter how good you are, everything today is about networking. And I'm an introvert, and it took me a while to learn that. Thankfully, God just pushed me through doors, But the more people you know in the business, that's another thing that's in your tool belt. And, you need a great soprano or a tenor to demo your work. If you don't know one personally, or none of the ones you know are available, then you reach out to your network. And so I would say those 2 things are the first 2 things to start off with. Just really educating yourself and then building a network.
I'm going to bottle that for my undergraduates. I say the exact same things, but it's going to be so much more meaningful coming from you.
Oh, well, it's the truth. And these are things that, like especially the networking thing, I learned a little bit later in my career than I should have, but God was good and brought people to me.
Young people are amazed how much people are willing to help you. Mentors are willing to really dig in and take time to show you things if you just listen. If you open up your ears and your hearts and listen to what our great mentors have to say, there's no limit to what they'll impart if you open yourself that way.
That's right. And that's because in order to make it in this world, you have to have people helping you along the way. And we all look back and we see the people who helped us. And so when people come to us, we automatically want to help them. And just a little, I've got a little bit of preacher in me, so I'm going to stand up and preach for just a second.
By all means.
Music is such a beautiful collaborative thing, and yet there's this little bit of humanity in us as musicians that's competitive. And sometimes that competitive can be a really good thing to help us better our craft and to become a better musician. And then sometimes it turns into something ugly where we cheer people on until they get too close. to our success level. And then all of a sudden they're the adversary. And so all of a sudden we don't support each other enough. And if I can just offer any encouragement to musicians out there, is that we encourage each other. There's no reason to ever speak ill of another composer because we're all in that growing learning process, and we need to lift each other up and support each other and to cheer each other on. And there needs to be none of the ugly competitiveness.
Yeah, it's really, especially in these times when we're all in such incredible challenges, we're all facing such unique and once in a lifetime type challenges. I think it's so important that people come together and support these artists, and we support each other.
That's right, and not just in the arts. I feel like the world is so divisive right now and polarized, and there's so many other frictions in the world that music does not need to be one of those frictions.
Yeah, I do. I firmly believe that music has the ability to heal and start to bridge some of these divides that we're all facing as a nation and individually. Have any of your works been focused on healing, and especially these days? Are you writing any pieces that you really feel have the ability to bridge that, to start to heal those wounds?
I hope so. You know, a lot of my work does lean towards the healing of brokenness, I think, just because of my own journey. And so that tends to be a common theme in my music. But there is one specific commission that did come through this summer. It was late summer, so I think I finished it maybe a month or two ago. And, you know, it is no secret that we live in very tumultuous times, both politically and racially and socially. And then you add in the isolation that we've all been in, you know, to some extent. And I think that it's just become this big mess. But anyways, Texas A&M, whom I've done several commissions for, they reached out to me, and the head of the choral studies there asked if I would be willing to accept a commission writing an arrangement of Lift Every Voice and Sing, which of course is the Black national anthem. And I immediately said yes. I said yes right away. And that was a really risky move for me for a couple reasons. So I'm going to explain why it was risky. And then, you know, I want to tell the viewers a little bit of the history behind it and why I accepted this commission. The first reason why it was risky for me is because I typically don't mix my music and politics. Not that that's wrong, but I feel like that my message in my music is what I was created to deliver. And sometimes politics can stand in the way and stop a message from being heard. And so just as a rule for myself, I try not to be very public in my political views. I have political views, but that's not to say that I have a hard time with other people being public. That might be their calling, and you should go for it. But for me, I've always made a distinction there. I just think that I need to not do anything to hinder the message that God's asked me to deliver. So that being said, the song itself right now, Lift Every Voice and Sing, is a little bit politically charged. It's a little bit socially charged right now. Some people in our country see this song as a cry for freedom. Some people see this song as drawing a line in the sand. Some people feel that this song is a weapon. Some people feel like this is a song to promote unity and peace. And I think that our life experiences kind of determine what emotions that this song brings up in us. And so that was one of the reasons why it was a little bit risky. You know, I stay away from anything politically, socially charged typically in my music, but I felt very compelled to say yes to this. Another reason why it was controversial on my part is the fact that I'm obviously a very, very white American. You know, my summer tan is almost gone. And then when you take the eye makeup off, I'm just like translucent, you know? And our viewers might not be aware of the fact, unless they're a choral director, that there has been a significant movement in the choral art, the greater choral world, that says that white choirs should not sing African American spirituals, and that white composers should not arrange or compose in this style, that is reserved for that community. That's their music, and they feel like they should be the ones to present this music. And so both of those two reasons right there kind of are a double whammy for me on this song. But like I said, I still felt like I was supposed to accept this commission, which it hasn't been released yet, so I might get crucified for this. But let me tell a little bit of the history behind my accepting it and why I accepted it. First of all, the why. When you read the words to this song, the text is beautiful, and as a believer, a person of faith, I 100% support this text. It's wonderful. It's what my heartbeat is. And I can speak for Texas A&M because we've had these conversations that we see this song as something that we can use for healing and unity and peace rather than to draw a line or to divide or to push away or to separate. And so that was a big heartbeat of both of ours on this. The history behind me accepting this commission a little bit, for years now, I've had a friendship with a prominent Black pastor in the Atlanta area. His name is the Reverend James Ward, and he's also a composer and a lyricist. In fact, I'm an honorary member of their church in Atlanta. I've got the certificate framed saying that I'm a member, and I love that. I'm probably the only white person in that congregation. And but they've embraced me as their own, and we've had this beautiful relationship and this friendship for years now. In fact, James and I have collaborated several times over the past 5 or 10 years now on different choral works. So because we've had that history and that relationship, we've been able to have some of those sensitive discussions. In fact, in the past, before even this commission came about, I reached out to him this year, in fact, and I asked him, because racial tensions have been rising in our country, that's not a surprise to anybody. And I said, James, I want your song to live well. We were getting ready to work on a collaborative project. I said, I want your song to live well. And I don't want to be the reason why it wouldn't live well. And I don't want to be the reason for there to be more friction. I would never want to cause any more friction in such a sensitive time like that. Would you like me to step back from this project and then you could collaborate maybe with another Black composer? And because I totally understood that. And my heart was just whatever would help you and your work the most, that's what I want to do. And I love his response. He came back, he said, absolutely not. He said the greatest way, I love this, he said the greatest way to show honor and to support is to celebrate each other's words and to sing each other's music and to embrace each other's writings. And so we've collaborated several times since that. So having had this history over the years, when Texas A&M reached out and asked me to arrange Lift Every Voice and Sing, I reached out to James, knowing some of his stories from segregation and knowing how gracefully he's carried some of those scars and the wisdom in which he maneuvers the world that he lives in. And I reached out and I asked if he would be willing to partner with me on this commission. And so he wrote I asked him if he would write a new text for one of the verses.
Oh, wow.
And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And he wrote it in the style of the original text. And so you don't even know when the original text ends and when his starts and then when it goes back to the original text. And I thought, what a great way to bring in some of the modern things that we're living in right now to this historic song that means so much to so many people.
I love this dialogue of music can have to bring people together, to this old, new, this across the divide where people can talk. And this type of conversation, musically and personally, is so important in today's very charged political climate.
That's right. And I think that when we can build relationships that allows us to have the honest discussions, and the respectful discussions. And I think that in these discussions and in these relationships, it allows us to see that the truth is big enough and important enough to have room for multiple perspectives on that, and where we can learn from each other's perspectives, and that's where the healing starts, I think. So that's the story behind that commission. And I think that Texas A&M is planning on using this arrangement as a virtual choir project.
Ooh.
Not just for the university there. I think that it's going to be a worldwide project where they want to bring in so many different people to promote this unity and this peace and this support and this healing.
Well, it's an exciting project, and we'll all look forward to that. I'm sure many of us will look forward to hearing that and to when that comes to fruition.
Yeah, I think it will be published by the Hal Leonard Corporation this fall, and I think they're recording it in Orlando in a week or two, and then that's the plan, is this fall sometime.
Do you have do you conduct those recordings when they're done, or do you have input into any of those in those recordings?
Sometimes, yeah. In fact, they always tell me I have the freedom to give any direction I want. I'm not always in the studio with them, but if there is a particular piece that a specific interpretation, they're so gracious to allow me to pass that along. there have been times I've sung into my iPhone and passed that along and said, okay, now play this for them and tell them just to do it better than me, but this is what I'm going for. So yeah, and there have been times when, I've been in the studio with them. I try to make it down. They record twice a year, 2 or 3 times a year. And I try to get down there, maybe once a year when they record.
Wonderful. Well, I think African American music is such an integral part of American music, which is formed like this. I'm doing a lesson on the spiritual with my students, and I'm bringing some of the top spiritual conductors and artists and that I've worked with, and I'm bringing them to speak to my students as we prepare these pieces, because I find that the conversation and the perspective changes when you get the background and you hear people who are in that tradition. I mean, I think it's so important. That's like some of the core repertoire in American choirs are spirituals and African American music. And whenever I've toured Europe, that's what people want to hear is American music, and the root of American music. Most of it is this repertoire that we all engage with.
That's right, and that we can also honor them. I feel like by singing their music. So.
Well, Heather, thank you so much for joining us today. Your career is so special, and you have such a special soul, and I look forward to continued success from you as you engage so many people and you warm so many hearts with your faith and with your art.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us on Music Matters 2020. Please check out our website at www.jasontramm.com for our list of upcoming guests and topics. We have 2 shows this weekend coming up. On Wednesday, we have a wonderful husband and wife team, Dimitri Pitas and Leah Edwards. Dimitri is a star at the Metropolitan Opera. He's been on the broadcast and has had a wonderful career. And his beautiful wife, Leah Edwards, a soprano of quite distinction. And they've started their own opera company in Charleston, South Carolina, often singing off a pickup truck and bringing opera to the people. An incredible story of perseverance of 2 wonderful artists in this challenging time. So I hope you join us on Wednesday at 2:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and hit that like button and on Facebook. And thank you so much. And remember, keep music alive.
I was an elementary music teacher for 4 years in North Dallas a long time ago. Actually just right up the road at Grace Academy of Dallas. And it was a great job. I loved it. I learned so much from this. And my greatest challenge was trying to find fun, fresh, creative, exciting ways to teach music theory to the kids because, well, music theory tends to be none of those things. And so I taught them scale tones by playing their phone numbers on the piano. And we had a lot of fun with that. For those of you in the audience who are not musicians, I'm going to give you a very quick crash course in music theory. A scale is made up of 8 tones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and all the songs in the world. Basically, you just rearrange those 8 numbers and you have a new song. So whether your favorite songs are old hymns, Beethoven, Taylor Swift, I don't know. Basically, we just take those 8 numbers and we put them in a different order. Very simplified. So we had a good time with that, and the kids would come back for weeks and say, oh, Miss Sorenson, can you teach us about scale tones again? So it was a lot of fun. But it got me to thinking, are our phone numbers randomly assigned to us by AT&T and Sprint and Verizon? Or does the universe in some way match up our phone numbers with our personalities, our life experiences, that kind of a thing? For instance, there's a gentleman in Queens, New York, and his phone number is 531-3583. And when you play that with scale tones, it sounds like this. 531-3583. And so I've always wanted to call him up and say, hey, John, you don't know me, but are you maybe a military veteran? Maybe you're a war hero? Maybe a descendant from Francis Scott Key, the man who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. But I've always been a little shy, and so I've never called him up, so I'll never know. But that is his phone number. Another example of this, there's a lady in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. She's got a phone number that I think maybe I kind of want. One day I think this would be a fun phone number to have. And I was actually in Stroudsburg a couple years ago giving a concert, and I had to say, is there a Tiffany Schultz in the audience? Because I'm about to give out your phone number. She didn't raise her hand, and so I did. I gave out her phone number, and this is her phone number with scale tones. not making any of this up. And so I told you, I thought, well, maybe I want to have that phone number one day. That sounds like a fun phone number. But then I got to thinking, maybe the universe gave her this phone number because she's like the Samaritan woman at the well in Scripture, and she's had 6 husbands already, and the man that she's... Never mind, Tiffany, you can keep your phone number. So then I got to thinking, well, I have a phone number. I'm a composer. And so I have recently written a new composition, and I have titled my composition 6722956. I have changed one of those digits, y'all. I'm not going to tell you which one. But in just a minute, the orchestra is going to help me play this new composition. Before they do that, though, I want to give you some context for what my phone number sounds like in scale tones. So here is 6722956. Got that? Let me play that one more time so you know what to listen for. 6722956. So, okay, I think we're about ready to take this with orchestra. And I'm going to start off by playing my area code, which is 972. And I'm going to play that a couple more times. And here we go. 672295667. You guys get the idea, right?
Joy to the world. heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and heaven and nature sing. Joy to the world. 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 The Savior reign. Let men their songs employ, while fields and floods, rock hills and plain. Repeat the sounding joy. Repeat the sounding joy. Repeat the sounding joy. Sing Gloria. Sing Gloria. Sing Gloria. Sing Gloria. He rules the world with truth and grace, and makes the nations prove the glories of his righteousness, and wonders of his love, and wonders of his love.